The golden light of early morning spread across the murky waters of the Zambezi River Delta, where thick papyrus reeds swayed gently in the humid breeze. The wet season had failed for the fourth consecutive year, leaving the once mighty waterways reduced to isolated pools connected only by thin streams of sluggish water. The air hung heavy with moisture and decay, carrying the distinctive earthy scent of mud and aquatic vegetation struggling to survive in the diminishing habitat. In a relatively deep section of the river, sheltered by overhanging fever trees and dense reed beds, a hippopod was settling after their nightly grazing expedition on land. The baby hippo, barely 4 weeks old, floated close to its mother's enormous bulk in the brownish water. Its skin was a soft pinkish gray, still showing the tender qualities of infancy, with small folds around its stubby legs and barrel-shaped body. The tiny ears twitched constantly, responding to every sound in the aquatic environment. Its small mouth occasionally opened to reveal the beginnings of what would eventually become formidable tusks, but for now were merely tiny ivory buds. For weeks earlier, the birth had occurred during a rare cool evening when the temperature had dropped just enough to provide some relief from the oppressive heat. The mother hippo, a relatively young female of only 10 years experiencing her first calving, had initially shown extraordinary devotion to her offspring. She had kept the calf positioned perfectly between herself and the safety of deeper water, teaching it to surface for air at regular intervals, guiding it to nurse underwater, and protecting it fiercely from the territorial bull hippo who sometimes showed aggression toward new calves. During those early nights, when Nile crocodiles prowled the shallows and the grunting calls of rival hippos echoed across the water, the mother had maintained constant vigilance, creating an impenetrable barrier of maternal protection around her vulnerable baby. However, as the third week approached, subtle changes began manifesting in the mother's behavior. The prolonged drought had dramatically reduced the available grazing areas on land, forcing the entire pod to travel greater distances each night to find sufficient grass and vegetation. The physical stress of extended nightly journeys, combined with the psychological pressure of competing for scarce resources with other hungry hippos, began eroding her natural maternal instincts. The hormonal balance that sustained her nurturing behaviors started shifting. Cortisol levels rose while oxytocin production decreased, fundamentally altering her recognition of and attachment to her own offspring. Now, in the morning light filtering through the water's surface, the baby hippo felt an overwhelming need to nurse. Instinct guided it toward its mother's massive form, navigating through the turbid water with increasing confidence. The familiar taste of the water near its mother, slightly different from the surrounding river due to her presence, drew the calf closer. It positioned itself beneath her belly, seeking the familiar location for nursing, its small mouth opening expectantly. But instead of the accustomed tolerance and gentle repositioning, the mother suddenly lurched sideways with startling force. Her massive head, easily capable of crushing small boats with its powerful jaws, swung toward the calf with unmistakable aggression. The displacement of water sent the baby tumbling through the murky river, its small body completely overwhelmed by the force. Frightened squeals emerged from the calf's mouth as it struggled to right itself and surface for air. This was not the playful roughness of teaching moments, but genuine rejection. The mother opened her mouth wide in a threat display, showing the massive canine teeth that could grow to over a foot long, signaling absolute intolerance of the calf's presence. Her small eyes, usually soft when regarding her offspring, now showed only the cold indifference of stress-induced psychological disconnection. The baby hippo floated at the surface, trembling not just from the physical shock but from profound confusion. Its entire existence had centered on its mother, the source of milk, protection, and guidance in navigating the complex social dynamics of hippo life. Now the only constant in its young life was actively driving it away. The calf made small distressed vocalizations, high-pitched sounds that normally would have triggered immediate maternal response. But the mother simply turned away, submerging to rest on the river bottom, completely ignoring the desperate calls of her offspring. The pod began their daily routine as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The dominant matriarch, a massive female with decades of experience surviving drought cycles and territorial conflicts, had detected subtle changes in water chemistry that suggested a larger, more permanent pool existed approximately 15 kilometers upstream. The survival of the entire pod depended on relocating before their current refuge became completely uninhabitable. The decision was made through a series of low-frequency vocalizations that traveled through the water, imperceptible to most other species but clearly understood by every adult hippo present. The movement began gradually. Adult hippos started swimming in coordinated formation, their massive bodies creating currents that swept smaller debris along with them. The baby hippo, with its limited swimming endurance and strength depleted from lack of nursing, struggled desperately to maintain the pace. Its small legs paddled frantically, but the distance between it and the pod increased with each passing minute. The mother swam with the group without once looking back, without responding to the increasingly frantic calls of her calf. In her stress-altered state of consciousness, there existed only one imperative: survival. The calf had transformed from cherished offspring to mere impediment, a drain on energy reserves she could no longer afford to expend. The gap widened from several body lengths to dozens of meters, then hundreds. The baby hippo's desperate vocalizations, those high-pitched squeals of abandonment and fear, went completely unanswered. The sounds of the pod's movement, the splashing of their swimming, the occasional grunts and bellows of communication, the displacement of water by their enormous bodies, gradually faded into the background chorus of river sounds. Insects buzzing over the water surface, birds calling from the reed beds, and the gentle lapping of small waves against muddy banks became the only audible presence. Finally, the baby hippo stopped swimming entirely. Its small body, exhausted beyond endurance, simply floated at the surface, drifting with the sluggish current. It watched the massive gray forms gradually disappear around a bend in the river where thick vegetation obscured the view. The last sounds of the pod, the distinctive deep grunts and the heavy breathing when they surfaced for air, vanished into the terrifying silence of solitude. The feeling of abandonment settled over the baby hippo like the thick mud that coated the riverbanks. For the first time in its brief existence, it was completely alone. No mother to protect it from crocodiles, no pod to guide it to food sources, nothing but the uncertain safety of murky water and the vast, dangerous world beyond. The sun, now approaching its zenith, beat down on the water's surface with relentless intensity. The baby hippo, lacking the thick protective skin of adults and the behavioral knowledge to seek deeper, cooler water, began suffering from heat stress. It let out a long, mournful call, a final cry for help directed toward where the pod had disappeared. The sound carried across the water, echoed off the distant trees, and then dissolved into silence with no response, no acknowledgement, no hope of reunion. 3 days had passed since the baby hippo's abandonment, and each hour represented a precarious balance between survival and surrender. Its small body had become noticeably thinner, the soft pink-gray skin beginning to show signs of dehydration and sun damage. The large eyes, once bright and curious, now appeared sunken with dark circles beneath them, telltale signs of exhaustion and malnutrition. The calf's movements had become lethargic, conserving what little energy remained in its depleted reserves. Primitive survival instinct had guided the baby hippo to a small tributary channel branching off from the main river. Here, dense vegetation provided some shade, and the water, though shallow, remained relatively cool. The calf had discovered this refuge during the peak heat of the second day, when desperation had overridden its natural fear of leaving the familiar main channel. This small sanctuary offered temporary respite from the brutal sun, but without mother's milk, the baby's body was slowly consuming its own limited fat reserves. Young hippos cannot digest vegetation until they are several months old. The calf could only float in the protective water, occasionally drinking it but gaining no nutrition, waiting for some miracle of maternal return that would never come. When the morning light filtered through the canopy of riverside trees, creating dappled patterns on the water's surface, new sounds began emerging from upstream. First came the distinctive sound of large bodies entering water, multiple splashes in quick succession. Then the grunting vocalizations of semi-aquatic mammals communicating. A small group of Cape buffalo was approaching the water channel for their morning drinking ritual. During the wet season, these massive bovines would have had numerous watering options, but drought conditions had forced them to share the limited water sources with hippos, crocodiles, and other desperate wildlife. The baby hippo lifted its head slightly, its clouded eyes attempting to focus on the shapes appearing through the reeds. Its vision, still developing and severely compromised by exhaustion and malnutrition, could distinguish only basic forms and movements. What it perceived was a group of large, dark-colored animals moving together as a unit, their size and herd behavior creating vague similarities to its fragmented memories of the hippopod. The buffalo group consisted of approximately 12 animals, several large bulls, cows, and younger individuals, led by an old matriarch with massive curved horns and scarred hide that testified to decades of survival. As the buffalo herd waded into the shallow water to drink, they immediately detected the scent of hippo, a wild musk that was unmistakable but presented no immediate threat from such a small individual. The lead matriarch raised her massive head, nostrils flaring as she assessed the situation. Her experienced eyes located the baby hippo floating listlessly about 20 meters away. Buffalo and hippos often shared water sources with mutual tolerance. Neither species typically threatened the other. The weakened calf clearly posed no danger to the herd. In the confused, desperate mind of the baby hippo, the dark coloring of the buffalo, their group movement patterns, and their substantial size created a deceptive illusion. The overwhelming need for protection and maternal care, combined with vision impaired by exhaustion, made the calf believe this might be its lost pod. Young hippos recognized their mothers primarily through vocalizations, scent, and physical contact rather than visual identification alone. The baby's compromised mental state and desperate circumstances prevented it from processing the obvious differences between buffalo and hippos. The baby hippo struggled to generate enough energy to swim toward the buffalo herd. Its small legs moved with pathetic weakness, each paddling motion requiring enormous effort from its depleted body. It moved slowly through the water, emitting weak, plaintive vocalizations, the distressed calls of a young hippo seeking its mother and the safety of the pod. The sounds were heartbreaking in their desperation, carrying across the quiet morning air with unmistakable urgency and need. The buffalo herd observed the approaching baby hippo with wary curiosity. These intelligent animals had no instinct to care for other species, particularly semi-aquatic ones so different from themselves. However, they also recognized the calf posed no threat. The matriarch let out a low, rumbling grunt, a sound that served as communication within the herd, but meant nothing to the baby hippo. Several younger buffalo turned their large heads to watch the strange creature's approach, their ears twitching with uncertainty, but showing no signs of aggression or alarm. The baby hippo continued its laborious progress toward the herd, each movement consuming precious energy it could not afford to expend. The distance gradually decreased from 20 meters to 15, then to 10. Each meter covered represented an act of desperate hope, the belief that this group represented safety, belonging, and the maternal care it had lost. The calf's small mouth opened, emitting increasingly urgent vocalizations, pleading sounds that would have immediately triggered response from any adult hippo but had no meaning to the buffalo. The buffalo herd began exhibiting signs of unease as the baby hippo drew nearer. Although they didn't perceive it as a predatory threat, the presence of another species behaving strangely activated their cautious instincts. The matriarch stomped one massive hoof in the shallow water, creating a splash, a warning signal to the herd. The other buffalo began backing away from the water's edge, their survival instincts suggesting it was time to move on to safer grazing areas. Slowly, with the characteristic unhurried pace of their species unless threatened, the buffalo herd began withdrawing from the water channel. They did not flee or show panic. This was simply part of their daily routine. Drinking completed, time to move to feeding grounds. For them, the encounter with the strange baby hippo was merely an unusual moment in an otherwise normal day, quickly forgotten as they focused on their own survival priorities in the drought-stricken landscape. The baby hippo watched its perceived pod moving away and desperately attempted to follow. Its weak paddling became more frantic, the small legs churning water with every remaining bit of strength. In a last desperate effort to prevent abandonment, it emitted louder, more anguished calls, sounds that combined the natural vocalizations of a young hippo with the universal language of abandonment and terror that transcends species. The calls echoed across the water and through the surrounding bush, heartbreaking in their raw desperation. However, the small body could not sustain this level of exertion. After swimming approximately 200 meters from the water channel into the increasingly shallow margins where the buffalo had retreated onto land, the baby hippo's strength completely failed. The small legs stopped their frantic paddling. The body, already struggling to maintain buoyancy with depleted fat reserves, began sinking slightly lower in the water. Breathing became rapid and shallow, the small rib cage visibly straining with each labored breath. The heart, pushed beyond its limits by exertion and malnutrition, beat erratically. Finally, unable to continue, the baby hippo drifted into the muddy shallows near the water's edge. Its body came to rest half in water, half on the exposed mud, in a position that would normally be comfortable for a resting hippo but now simply represented complete physical collapse. The small barrel-shaped body lay on its side, the pink-gray skin now covered in a layer of drying mud, chest rising and falling with each difficult breath. Large eyes, filled with tears that mixed with the river water, watched the buffalo herd gradually disappearing into the dry woodland savanna, their dark forms merging with the shadows of acacia trees until they completely vanished from view. This time, the baby hippo had no strength remaining even to vocalize. It simply lay there, eyes fixed on the direction where the herd had disappeared, experiencing an emptiness and despair more profound than physical suffering. The last fragile hope of finding protection, of being accepted into a family, of escaping the terrifying solitude, had evaporated like morning mist under the harsh African sun. The small body lay motionless except for the increasingly shallow breathing, a sign that life itself was approaching its final moments. The sun climbed higher, transforming the riverside into a furnace. With no strength to return to deeper water, no energy to seek shade, the baby hippo could only lie in the exposed mud and surrender to fate. The skin, designed to remain moist and protected by water or mud, began drying and cracking under the relentless solar radiation. Dehydration reached critical levels. The body temperature, normally regulated by water immersion, climbed to dangerous heights. Each breath came slower than the last, the small chest barely moving, the once bright eyes now glazed and unfocused. In those quiet moments between consciousness and unconsciousness, the baby hippo perhaps experienced fragmentary memories from its earliest days of life, the comforting pressure of its mother's body in the water, the taste of rich milk, the security of being surrounded by the protective bulk of the pod, the gentle guidance learning to surface for air. But those memories had become distant, dreamlike fragments, slipping away like the receding waters of the drought-stricken river, almost impossible to grasp, fading into the approaching darkness. The sound of a boat motor echoed across the water, its distinctive mechanical rhythm cutting through the natural soundscape of the river environment. Dr. Jennifer McComb, a wildlife veterinarian with 18 years of experience specializing in aquatic and semi-aquatic African species, was navigating a Kenya Wildlife Service research boat along a tributary of the Zambezi. This was her third consecutive week conducting surveys to assess how drought conditions were affecting hippo populations in the Delta region. The prolonged dry spell had forced hippo pods to concentrate in shrinking water bodies, creating dangerous overcrowding that often resulted in territorial violence, disease transmission, and the abandonment of vulnerable young animals. Thomas Nyathi, a Zimbabwean wildlife ecologist with 5 years of field experience and an exceptional ability to detect subtle environmental anomalies, sat in the front of the boat scanning the shoreline with binoculars. His research focused on how climate change and habitat degradation affected the reproductive success and juvenile survival rates of large aquatic mammals. He maintained detailed notes on every observation, creating a comprehensive database that would inform future conservation strategies. As the boat rounded a bend where the channel widened slightly, Thomas suddenly signaled Dr. McComb to cut the engine. He had spotted an unusual shape in the muddy shallows near the eastern bank, a small, pinkish-gray form that didn't match the typical debris, rocks, or mud formations common to the area. The positioning was wrong for a resting adult hippo, and the coloration was lighter than expected. Both researchers carefully maneuvered the boat closer, Dr. McComb's experienced hands keeping the vessel stable, while Thomas prepared the camera equipment for documentation. They approached cautiously, aware that even a young hippo could potentially be dangerous if its mother was nearby, and that a seemingly abandoned calf might trigger aggressive protective responses from any adult hippos in the vicinity. When the distance closed to approximately 15 meters, the image resolved into heartbreaking clarity. An extremely small baby hippo lay partially submerged in the muddy shallows, its tiny body motionless except for barely perceptible breathing. The skin showed severe sun damage and dehydration, appearing cracked and dry where it was exposed to air. The eyes were closed, and the small body was so emaciated that the outline of ribs was visible beneath the damaged skin. The small mouth hung slightly open, showing the tiny developing tusks of a very young calf. Dr. McComb immediately transitioned into emergency response mode. She anchored the boat in the shallow water and signaled Thomas to maintain distance while she carefully approached the baby hippo on foot through the mud. Years of experience had taught her that young hippos, despite their vulnerable appearance, could panic violently if startled, potentially injuring themselves further or disappearing into water where rescue would become impossible. She moved through the knee-deep mud with slow, deliberate steps, speaking in low, soothing tones though she knew the calf might be too far gone to register her presence. When she reached the baby hippo, she knelt in the mud beside it, first observing without touching. The breathing was extremely shallow and irregular, perhaps only 4 or 5 breaths per minute. The pulse, detectable through the thin skin behind the small ear, was weak and thready. Body temperature, assessed by gently touching the skin, felt abnormally cool despite the heat, a sign that the body's thermoregulation had failed. She placed her hand very gently on the baby hippo's small flank to check for response. The contact elicited a slight twitch, and the eyes opened partially, dull, clouded eyes that looked up at her with no fear, no recognition, only the blank stare of extreme exhaustion approaching death. The calf tried to vocalize but managed only the faintest squeak from its small mouth, a sound so weak it barely carried across the meters separating them. Dr. McComb immediately began emergency field intervention. She carefully opened her waterproof medical kit and extracted a bottle of electrolyte solution specifically formulated for wildlife rescue. Administering fluids to a baby hippo required extreme care. Their specialized digestive systems were sensitive, and rapid rehydration could cause fatal shock. She used a small syringe to place tiny amounts of solution just inside the calf's mouth, allowing it to be absorbed slowly through the mucous membranes rather than forcing swallowing, which the weakened calf might not manage. Thomas, meanwhile, had contacted the main Wildlife Rescue Coordination Center via satellite phone, reporting their location and the critical condition of the abandoned calf. He also documented the scene with detailed photographs and video footage, essential records for both immediate medical assessment and long-term research on drought impacts on hippo populations. After 40 minutes of on-site stabilization, the baby hippo had become marginally more responsive. The eyes remained partially open for longer periods, and it managed a few weak attempts at vocalization. Dr. McComb determined this was the optimal window for transport to the rescue facility. Waiting longer risked the calf's condition deteriorating further, but moving it earlier might have caused fatal shock in its unstabilized state. Transporting a baby hippo presented unique challenges compared to terrestrial mammals. Despite weighing approximately 25 to 30 kilograms in its current malnourished state, normally around 40 kilograms at 4 weeks, the calf's body was dense and awkwardly shaped. Its skin required constant moisture to prevent further damage. Dr. McComb and Thomas together carefully lifted the baby hippo onto a specialized transport stretcher lined with water-soaked towels, creating a makeshift aquatic environment for the journey. The boat ride to the Lake Kariba Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took nearly 3 hours, navigating carefully through the network of channels and avoiding the territorial waters of resident hippopods who would perceive the boat as a potential threat. Throughout the journey, Dr. McComb sat beside the baby hippo, continuously monitoring its breathing and heart rate while keeping the towels moist with river water. She spoke to it constantly in gentle tones, providing the auditory stimulation that young hippos naturally respond to, hoping to maintain some level of consciousness and will to survive. Thomas piloted the boat with extreme care, avoiding any sudden movements or jolts that could cause additional stress to the critically compromised calf. He maintained radio contact with the rehabilitation center, providing updates on their progress and the baby hippo's condition so that the facility could prepare for immediate intensive care upon arrival. The Lake Kariba Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, established in 1984, was one of Southern Africa's premier facilities for rescuing and rehabilitating orphaned and injured aquatic wildlife. The sprawling complex included temperature-controlled indoor pools for initial stabilization, larger outdoor pools for rehabilitation, a fully equipped veterinary hospital, and most critically, a team of experienced caregivers who had successfully raised dozens of orphan hippos, many of whom had been released back into wild populations upon reaching maturity. When the boat arrived at the center's dock, Dr. Patricia Moyo, the facility director with 25 years of experience in hippo conservation and rehabilitation, was waiting with her emergency response team. She had reviewed the photographs Thomas had transmitted and prepared the critical care unit specifically for a severely compromised neonatal hippo. The baby was immediately transferred to a specialized pool maintained at optimal temperature with carefully controlled water chemistry to prevent shock while providing the aquatic environment essential for hippo health. Dr. McComb performed a comprehensive examination in the shallow treatment pool, where the water depth allowed both support for the calf's body and easy access for medical procedures. Temperature, heart rate, and respiratory rate were recorded. Blood samples were carefully drawn from the small leg vein for comprehensive analysis. The examination revealed severe dehydration estimated at approximately 20% of body weight, acute malnutrition from at least 3 days without nursing, early-stage skin infections from sun exposure and mud contact, and preliminary signs of organ stress. But critically, no indication of permanent neurological damage or irreversible organ failure. Treatment commenced immediately with a multifaceted approach. Intravenous fluid therapy was initiated using specialized solutions designed for large mammals, providing gradual rehydration while restoring electrolyte balance. Nutritional support began with small amounts of specialized formula developed specifically for orphaned hippo calves, with composition meticulously matched to hippo mother's milk, higher in fat and certain proteins than formulas designed for terrestrial mammals. Topical treatment was applied to sun-damaged skin using medications that promoted healing while providing protection from infection. Marcus Kumalo, a senior animal care specialist with 12 years of experience specifically with hippos, was assigned as the baby's primary caregiver. He was a quiet, patient man with an intuitive understanding of hippo behavior and psychology. Having successfully raised 15 orphaned hippo calves, he recognized that beyond medical intervention, the baby needed emotional bonding and psychological security to fully recover from the trauma of maternal rejection and abandonment. The first 72 hours were classified as critical period. The baby hippo remained in the intensive care pool, monitored constantly with caregivers maintaining 24-hour watch schedules. Marcus spent the majority of this time in the pool itself, providing his physical presence as a substitute for maternal contact. Young hippos naturally press against their mothers in water. Marcus allowed the calf to rest against his body, providing that essential tactile comfort while preventing the calf from drifting or struggling. During the first nights, the baby hippo experienced frequent distress episodes, suddenly awakening with frightened vocalizations. The traumatic memories of rejection, the terror of abandonment, and the confusion with the buffalo herd haunted its sleep. Marcus learned to recognize the early signs of these episodes: subtle changes in breathing pattern, slight vocalizations, and increased movement. He would immediately respond by speaking softly, gently touching the calf, and in some cases, making low rumbling sounds in his throat that approximated the comforting vocalizations adult hippos use with their young. The feeding protocol was carefully structured, every 2 hours during the first week, day and night. Each feeding session involved more than just nutrition delivery. Marcus would sit in the shallow water, cradling the baby hippo in a position similar to how a mother would position her calf for underwater nursing. The bottle, designed with a specialized nipple that simulated the nursing experience, was offered slowly, allowing the calf to control the pace of feeding. This process rebuilt not only physical strength but also the psychological association between feeding and safety, between proximity to a caregiver and relief from fear. By the end of the first week, encouraging signs of recovery were emerging. The baby hippo's eyes regained some of their natural brightness, showing increased alertness and curiosity about its surroundings. The skin began healing rapidly once properly moisturized and protected, new tissue replacing the damaged areas with remarkable speed characteristic of healthy young animals. Most significantly, the calf began displaying natural behaviors, vocalizing with the full range of hippo sounds including the small grunts and squeaks of contentment, initiating playful interactions with Marcus, and showing curiosity about the pool environment. Dr. McComb conducted daily examinations to monitor recovery progress. Weight gain was steady, approximately 400 grams per day, an excellent rate for a rescued hippo calf. Blood work showed dramatically improving nutrition markers, normalizing electrolyte levels, and complete resolution of infection indicators. The baby's swimming coordination improved significantly as muscle strength returned, and the natural buoyancy control that hippos use to regulate their position in water was developing normally. By the beginning of the third week, the baby hippo was strong enough to graduate from the intensive care pool to a larger rehabilitation pool where it could practice swimming longer distances and develop more advanced aquatic skills. But the most critical step in rehabilitation was yet to come: introduction to Busara, a 7-year-old female hippo who had herself been rescued as a young calf and had since developed remarkable maternal instincts despite never giving birth. Busara had become one of the center's most valuable assets for hippo rehabilitation. Young enough to be energetic and playful, yet mature enough to display protective and nurturing behaviors, she had successfully helped raise 6 previous orphaned hippos. Her presence provided rescued calves with the essential experience of being part of hippo society, learning the complex social behaviors, communication methods, and survival skills that human caregivers, despite their dedication, could never fully replicate. The introduction was orchestrated with meticulous care. Marcus brought the baby hippo to a neutral pool where Busara was already waiting with her keeper. The pools were connected by a water channel, allowing gradual approach rather than sudden confrontation. The baby hippo, still somewhat tentative but growing more confident daily, noticed Busara's presence immediately. Young hippos have acute awareness of other hippos through a combination of visual recognition, sound, and particularly through subtle water pressure changes caused by the movements of large bodies. Busara's response exceeded even the experienced staff's optimistic expectations. She immediately moved toward the channel opening, emitting the low-frequency rumbles that adult hippos use for friendly communication. Her large body language, ears forward, mouth closed, movements slow and deliberate, signaled complete non-aggression and welcome. When the baby hippo tentatively entered the channel, Busara approached and gently touched the calf with her massive snout, sniffing and investigating with obvious interest rather than the territorial aggression adult hippos sometimes show toward unfamiliar young. Within minutes, a scene unfolded that left even veteran caregivers emotionally moved. The baby hippo swam directly to Busara and pressed its small body against her massive flank, the exact position a calf would naturally take with its birth mother. Busara responded by turning her head and nuzzling the baby gently, making soft vocalizations. For the first time since its abandonment, the baby hippo was experiencing the presence of its own species in a context of safety and acceptance. The calf began making contented squeaking sounds, vocalizations that hippo young make when feeling secure and happy. Over the following days, Busara became the baby hippo's constant companion and surrogate mother. She guided the calf during feeding times, though the baby still required formula from bottles. She demonstrated proper hippo behaviors through patient example: how to rest comfortably on the pool bottom, how to surface for breathing with minimal energy expenditure, how to interact with other hippos through appropriate vocalizations and body language. She provided the physical comfort of hippo contact that is essential for normal psychological development: the ability to press against another hippo's bulk, to feel the subtle movements and vibrations that communicate safety and belonging. The rehabilitation center housed 8 other orphaned or rescued hippos of various ages. As the baby grew stronger, it was gradually introduced to small groups of these other residents. Each introduction was supervised, but the natural social inclinations of hippos made these integrations remarkably smooth. Hippos are more socially flexible than often believed, and the presence of Busara as an established member of the pool community facilitated acceptance by the others. Juma, a playful 4-year-old male hippo with a tendency toward gentle mischief, became the baby's first friend beyond Busara. Despite the age and size difference, Juma showed remarkable consideration with the smaller calf, initiating underwater play sessions that helped build swimming endurance and coordination while being careful never to be too rough. These play sessions, chasing, gentle bumping, diving together, served essential developmental purposes, strengthening muscles, improving aquatic skills, and teaching social interaction rules. The baby hippo's personality began emerging distinctly as confidence grew. It demonstrated particular intelligence, closely observing the actions of both caregivers and other hippos with intense focus before attempting new behaviors itself. It learned to accept bottle feeding from multiple caregivers faster than most rescued calves, showing adaptability. The swimming coordination advanced rapidly through constant practice and interaction with older hippos. Dr. McCumb was impressed by the recovery trajectory. After 6 weeks, the baby hippo had gained nearly 15 kilograms and showed absolutely no lasting physical effects from the near-death experience. All blood work had normalized completely. Behavioral assessments indicated healthy psychological development with strong bonds formed to both human caregivers and hippo companions. The skin had healed entirely, showing the healthy pink-gray coloration of a thriving young hippo. Marcus noticed the baby had developed a particular behavior pattern in the mornings. Each dawn, it would float at the pool's surface facing east, watching the sunrise with apparent fascination. This behavior initially puzzled the caregivers until they theorized it might be connected to early memories from life with its birth pod, when hippos typically return to water at dawn after nighttime grazing. This retention of natural behavioral rhythms, despite the trauma, indicated healthy cognitive function and memory processing. By the 8th week, the baby hippo was fully integrated into the rehabilitation center's daily routines. It participated in group pool activities where young hippos would play, socialize, and practice natural behaviors under caregiver supervision. These sessions were crucial for both physical health and social development, teaching the baby the complex dynamics of hippo social hierarchies, the meaning of various vocalizations, and the subtle body language that prevents conflicts. The transformation was extraordinary. The dying creature found in the muddy shallows had become a thriving young hippo with bright, alert eyes, healthy weight, playful personality, and the confident demeanor of a well-adjusted calf. More significantly, it had learned to trust again, forming deep attachments to both humans and hippos that would serve as foundation for continued development toward eventual release. Dr. Moyo, watching the baby hippo play with Juma and Busara in the late afternoon light, felt the profound satisfaction that comes with successful rescue and rehabilitation. This calf would spend approximately 3 more years at the center, growing strong and learning the skills necessary for survival in wild hippo society. Its journey would continue through adolescence in the facility, gradual reintegration programs in protected river zones of Lake Kariba, and eventually, hopefully, return to wild populations as a fully capable adult hippo able to reproduce and contribute to the species' survival. But for now, in this moment, surrounded by the devoted care of experienced wildlife professionals and the companionship of other rescued hippos, the baby had found its new family and a second chance at life. As evening settled over the center, the baby hippo nestled close to Busara in the warm pool water, their bodies touching in the comfortable proximity that hippos naturally seek. The trauma of maternal rejection and abandonment had been replaced by the security of belonging and acceptance. Tomorrow would bring new developmental milestones and growth opportunities, learning to eat solid vegetation, expanding swimming endurance, developing more complex social relationships with the growing group of rescued hippos. But tonight, the baby slept peacefully beneath the African stars, protected, cared for, and loved, dreaming perhaps of a future where it would once again swim freely in the wild rivers and lakes of its homeland. The circle of life had been fractured by drought, stress, and the harsh realities of wildlife survival in changing environments. But human compassion combined with scientific knowledge and the natural resilience of hippos had created a new circle, one of rescue, rehabilitation, and renewed hope. The baby hippo's journey from the edge of death to the promise of a complete life stood as testament to the profound possibilities that emerge when conservation efforts unite medical expertise with genuine dedication and care. In the months and years ahead, this story would be shared with visitors to the rehabilitation center, inspiring them to support hippo conservation initiatives and broader efforts to protect aquatic ecosystems. The baby hippo, unknowing of its symbolic role, had become an ambassador for its species, its survival representing hope for all orphaned hippos and for the preservation of the rivers, lakes, and wetlands they depend upon. The African night settled peacefully over the center, filled with the gentle sounds of hippos breathing at the surface, the quiet splash of water against pool edges, and the distant calls of other nocturnal wildlife. In this tranquil setting, the baby hippo continued its remarkable journey of healing and growth, surrounded by protection and pointing toward a future bright with possibility and the ultimate goal of return to the wild populations where it truly belonged.